conclusion, and it actually is the counter virtue. We figured it out that despair is the counter virtue.
I feel like God would look at you and be like, I know that's not how you feel right now. I want you to be vulnerable with me. I want you to be honest.
And welcome back to another week of the Lost Sheep Podcast. My name is Cole Bissett, and I'm joined here today by
Nazario Pangallo.
And oh wait, he's not here.
We have a two-person episode back.
Yeah, back. We're OG today. It's just Carly and I. Evan took a hiatus this week. He's just busy with some stuff with school. He's got a meeting he's got to attend this morning and cannot make it, sadly. So we were not able to get him on for this episode. We got a fun quote this week though, and I think we're excited to break it down. But how was your week? I want to check in, let's get a temperature check from Nazario over there.
Yeah, well, first off, real quick, before we get into that, welcome to episode number 69 here of the Lost Sheep Podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, leave us a review if you're on podcast, if you're on any of the audios. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, any of the places that you find the things we have. Do we have a giveaway going right now, Cole, or no?
Not right now.
We do not have a giveaway going right now, but we do have merchandise. Check out the shirts, wristbands, if you want them. Without further ado, Cole, do you know the quote? It says, "It was the best of times. It was the worst of times."
No, I don't.
Oh, well, that was basically my week because on Sunday we had the glorious moment of the Reds making the playoffs, and then we had the Tuesday and Wednesday, the worst of moments, being eliminated from the playoffs by the Los Angeles Dodgers. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. That was basically the definition of my week. I also had an exam yesterday, and the MLB playoffs began. But very exciting day today. We have this podcast that I am pumped for. Hopefully, the excitement actually leads to coming out in the right words here during this episode. But also, I have two friends from high school coming down this weekend, so I'm very, very excited for that. At Vanderbilt, playing Alabama, college game day for Vanderbilt at Alabama. Cole, I think this is maybe the first time that Parents' Weekend here at Alabama is college game day.
Yeah, and I think it's probably the first time that Parents' Weekend is, two ranked teams? Was that last
Maybe.
year?
I don't think it was
Ole
last
Miss,
year.
Alabama
I think
was one year,
it
right?
South Carolina last year? Ole Miss, yes, our freshman
Were they
year.
ranked?
And Ole Miss was ranked
They were
years
ranked?
ago, but
Okay, yeah. Normally, Parents' Weekend tends to be on kind of like just an okay game, I think, just because they want students to buy most of the tickets. So I don't know if they normally schedule it on a big game. But yeah, I did see this whole thing with the Reds happen this week with Nazario. I was actually studying, so it was a pretty busy week for me. However, there is one point where I was studying with my guys, and I look over, and it's 3-2, and I'm like, "Oh, the Reds are in this. It's the fifth inning." I'm like, "What is happening? Are they gonna have a shot to send it to Game 3?" And I literally, from the time that it took me to walk back from our center at the cottages back to our house, they had 5 runs scored on them, and I was like, "What in the world happened?" And so it was kind of a generational little fallout there, but. For me, decent week. I finally got through my last run of tests for a little bit, so I think I've got the next 2 weeks. I know I have the next week, but maybe the next 2 weeks to kind of breathe for a little bit, maybe get back into some disc golf action. But we'll see.
Let's talk about that because this week, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh no, let's not talk about it.
We
I think
went.
It's kind of happy.
Was it Tuesday? We went to play disc golf.
Tuesday,
the first time in probably a week and a half. It's been a little bit for us, and we have this one spot that we like to go to called the Hangar.
Yep.
And we call Cole's girlfriend on our way there,
Yeah.
and we're talking about disc golf, and she says before we get off the call, "Cole, don't let Nazario beat you." And we were both like, "Oh, that would never happen. I'm never gonna beat Cole." Well, by golly, I beat Cole, ladies and gentlemen, on Tuesday in disc golf. It was my best score. Even golf.
He shot par.
And Cole shot +1, and we took the lead. The craziest part, ladies and gentlemen, we go into hole 17. I believe that I was down 1 stroke, and as a par 3, I set myself up for a literal 7-foot putt for birdie. And if you know disc golf, 7-foot putt's pretty legit. That's not that bad. And Cole is about 50 feet away at least off his first shot. It was not his best tee shot. And he sets himself up for just a par. So he pars. So I walk up there for my birdie to send us into a tied 18th hole, and I missed it. I choked it away. So I'm like, shoot, it's over.
And it wasn't even just a close miss. It was it was a rough miss.
No, I hit the top of the basket, but
okay.
But anyways, so we go into the final hole. I'm down the stroke. I'm like, oh, I mean, I can try to tie this to do a playoff hole. And if you know what a mando is, it's basically you have to throw the disc between a certain spot. And if you go outside of it, you have to take a drop and a stroke. So Cole does this off his tee shot. I'm like, we have a shot. And then I messed it up and threw it out of the mando too. So we're both like, oh, this is just a terrible end. And then Cole throws, and then I throw, and Cole has a putt. He makes his putt, he wins. And he misses it, and I make mine. We go to a playoff. Not only did Cole miss this putt, but he threw it down a hill that made him miss his next putt. I made mine, and somehow I came back from a one-stroke deficit on hole 18 to win. It was quite the disc golf round.
Yeah, when I took that first putt, I think I missed basket left, and my disc normally just sits because it's a putter. Well, my putter did not sit. It rolled all the way down the bottom of the hill, and then I took a double bogey and lost the round. So yeah, congratulations, Nazario's first major upset in a podcast. And so yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. So that has been our week.
Yeah.
And we're gonna jump into the quote.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, the quote of the week.
Man, I really love that intro. I mean, I was listening to it on the way back from Birmingham, or not from my house yesterday. I was listening to our podcast from last week, and I was like, man, that's so awesome. There's one that's not my favorite. I don't like the practical prayer practice one. I don't know why. It's just not as good as the other ones. But anyways, the quote.
Yeah, so I feel like within the last couple of weeks of the podcast, our quotes have been from saints or from Christian philosophers, and it's already, tailored for us. And I was like, we need to change this up. We need a quote from somebody that's not a good quote. And so I looked up the worst quotes of all time. And I sent a couple to the group chat, and this is what we came up for today. I'm going to try to say his name right. This is from a German philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche. That's what Cole says his name is. And our quote for this week is, "Hope, in reality, is the worst of all evils because it prolongs the torments of man." I'll read that again, the quote for today. "Hope, in reality, is the worst of all evils because it prolongs the torments of man." And I was doing a little bit of research earlier today, Cole. This is going to be, I think, a fascinating conversation. Would you like to kick us off, or would you like me to do it?
You got it.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, I am going to preface this by giving a little background on Friedrich Nietzsche to try to understand what exactly he's saying here. Because obviously, as a Christian people, we know we are supposed to have a lot of hope. We know hope is not an evil thing. But what is Friedrich Nietzsche trying to go for here? Well, first off, let's talk about Friedrich Nietzsche. He was a German philosopher during the 1800s. And he is what they call he's a different type of atheist, is what we would say. And so his beliefs weren't that scientific evidence disproves God, therefore I do not believe in God. That was what you call more of a modern atheism, that scientific evidence shows that there's no God, which is, we know, not true at all. But his atheism that he believed in was that God is dead, that expressed his belief that society had abandoned belief in God, but not yet faced the consequences. So it wasn't as much as he just didn't believe in God, but he believed that society had given up on God, and yet, what did that mean for society? So Friedrich Nietzsche really had to do a lot with humans on their own. What does it mean to be a human being and live on this earth without religion and having to do things on our own and to take control of our own lives and purpose? And so that's really kind of the beginnings of his belief and what he thought about this. And I'm going to change it over to Cole before I go too much more in depth on that. But that is just the basics of what he's saying as we look at the quote, "Hope in reality is the worst of all evils because it prolongs the torments of man."
Yeah, so, and I'm going to sound a lot like Father Mike Schmitz for a little bit because this is a lot of what he said when I was kind of reviewing the quote for this week. So, first of all, I want to highlight what, hope is a theological virtue. So, what does that mean? We have the cardinal virtues, which are what? A little quiz for you, Nazario.
How many are there?
4.
The faith,
No,
hope,
that's
love.
theological. No.
The 4 cardinal virtues.
You want me to go
Temperance,
for it? Oh,
prudence,
yes.
perseverance.
No. Prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance.
Mm.
Yep. So those are your 4 cardinal virtues. And historically, those 4 virtues are just common virtues held among different cultures, and it wasn't really ever associated with anything theological. So as Christians, nobody ever really disagreed with the cardinal virtues in history. Like, the cardinal virtues are the virtues. It's a general set of standards. That's been the set of standards since the beginning of time. Prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Now, when you go into the Christian perspective, you have the theological virtues. That was created with Christianity. That was recognized with Christianity through theologians, through the church, through God, and that is faith, hope, and love. And particularly for this episode, we are going to focus on hope. So that's first things first, is hope comes from a Christian standpoint. So why hope? Why are we talking about hope? When we talk about hope, you have to relate it a lot to faith, because they kind of intertwine with their definition. So to have faith means you have to fully entrust yourself to someone else, right? And for us and our faith, that means we are fully entrusting ourselves in God in the present moment. Faith is all about present, right? Faith is not the future. Faith is the now. Hope is the same thing, but in the future. It's you have to fully entrust yourself to someone for the future, and you have to hope for that future. That's what that is. That hope is faith in the future. It's context. That's how that works. And so it's really fascinating to me, and especially, Friedrich Nietzsche's whole shtick, his whole spiel, is that he doesn't believe in a God. He doesn't think it's possible. And for him, if that's his reasoning, if that's his morality, then this is why I highlighted that faith, hope, and love came from a theological standpoint. Then if his reality is there is no God, then yeah, I would see why he would say hope is evil. Because hope is the want to have faith in the future with a God. And if he's disagreeing with that, then yeah, it's going to be evil, because there is no moral good for him. There's no moral set of standards. There's no moral set of grounds. Hope is actually taking you away from what the world has to provide. And so that's my first little spiel on it, but I'm curious to see how you take it.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to disagree with anything you say about hope, and I probably won't disagree with anything you say most of the time, Cole, but what I want to go a little bit more into is prolongs the torments of man. Prolongs the torments of man. Cole, when you think of torments of man, what do you think of?
I think a lot of what Nietzsche is trying to get at. Again, this is looking at the context of this quote. It's kind of hard to figure out what he's talking about, because you essentially have to remove God from the scenario. Right?
Well, no. Don't remove God. What do you think is just the torments of man in general?
What he's meaning, or
no,
what I think?
What do you think is the torments of man?
I think it's the evil in the world that we face. I think there's just natural torments of man: anxiety, worry, confusion, lust, pride, greed, evil, all the sins, but all the things that hurt us and make us think. What I think he's trying to say in this one is that hope gives us this false sense of reality, that especially, if God doesn't exist, what are we hoping for, right? And if we're hoping for something, then that's kind of like putting a mask over our problems in our day-to-day life. It's us saying, oh, because I'm hoping for this, even though there's no reason for me to hope for it, this suffering I'm going through right now means nothing. It shouldn't mean anything. And that is what Nietzsche is trying to say is wrong, because he's saying we should give knowledge to our present suffering, and we should live in our torment. And he thinks I would say, I think he thinks it's disguising it and it's hiding it. And so we don't face our torments ever, because we're trapped in this false sense of reality, this false sense of hope because he doesn't believe in a God.
Do you think that false sense of reality and that disguising and hiding of it is the right way to go about things? Is that what we as Christians, is that how we should handle things?
No, I don't think so.
So then is he right in what he's trying to say?
No. I don't agree with him. I don't agree with this quote. Do you agree with this quote?
No, I would never agree that hope
Okay.
is evil,
Okay.
but I think that he's not entirely wrong with what he's trying to get at, which
Here we go.
actually, when researching this quote, he actually, in a lot of his beliefs, challenged the Christian faith and changed and helped the Christian faith to grow. Interestingly enough, because he, as you say, he's kind of putting out this persona that hope disguises and hides the torments of man. And obviously, we didn't live in this time or long
Yeah.
before, so we don't know exactly how the church taught. Of course, we could have gone and researched this, but we don't know how the church will taught. But it seems like the church back then was like, your sufferings don't matter. Just think about the hope of the future, and don't worry about anything that's happening bad that's happening right now. Just the hope of the future. When in reality, that is not how we should live our lives, because suffering is a part of life. Who embraced suffering more than anyone, Cole?
Christ.
Jesus.
Yep.
If we don't embrace suffering, if we don't go to what Paul tells us, that suffering, what's the word he uses? I think just creates perseverance, gives us endurance. If we can work through this suffering, and suffering gives us hope
Okay.
in reality. And if we just push aside all this suffering, push aside our difficulties, could you not say that the devil can just use that in such a perfect way?
So you would say, I'm curious. This is going to be a very conversational episode because I think that's what this quote is kind of getting us to go at. So you would say you have to, I think right order in the way you deal with suffering is to have that hope before you enter the suffering.
I would not necessarily say that's always true,
Okay.
because when we pray and when we go to God, right order, I'm not sure that it would say that every single time you should be like, God, I'm just so hopeful. Thank you for all the hope you have given me. Because let's be so real, you do not feel that all the time. And if you just try to fake your way through that, we talked about faking it till you make it a couple episodes ago.
It's been a while.
But that is not how we're called to enter prayer, because if you do that, I'm going to be honest, I feel like God would look at you and be like, I know that's not how you feel right now. I don't want you to try to do that to me. I want you to be vulnerable with me. I want you to be honest. And so I would say that if you're feeling despair, if you're feeling like, wow, this is really hard, then you should open that up to God. Think about the agony in the garden. Jesus went, and he was terrified about what was going to happen. And what does it say the first thing that he did? He was agonizing. And he was so just bent out of shape about having to do this. And he asked God, please take this cup away from me. He didn't say, God, I hope in what you have planned here. I know what you have planned. He doesn't immediately start with hope. He starts with the difficulties. He starts with the sufferings.
I don't think he voices it. Well, the issue, he doesn't need to have hope.
That's true. That's true. But still, it's okay to open the suffering first, to go to the vulnerable, difficult place first before going to the hope. The hope could always be should be in the back of the mind, of course, but you can't just deny the difficult aspect in place of hope.
I don't think I'm saying either that you have to deny that aspect. I think when you're, again, if we're talking about hope from a moral standpoint, it's a theological virtue, like I said, so it's a Christian virtue. We created it. And if that's the case, then hope is the entrusting yourself to someone, and in the future especially, is having the faith that you can entrust yourself to someone in the future. I think that's the best way. Again, if we talk about redemptive suffering and we talk about the difference between that and regular suffering, what that looks like, I think what makes suffering redemptive is entering into it with the knowledge that you're going to have faith through this in the future, no matter how hard it brings. And so that's why I think it's better to enter suffering with that hope, because hope, from the sense, when we think of hope, we kind of think of hope as like this fleeting thing that's like, oh, I'm hoping it's not going to happen, but I have this hope, like I'm thinking of Star Wars every time we say hope, A New Hope. But in that sense, it's like, a lot of time when we have hope, like you had hope the Reds were going to win. The difference is the Reds, okay, and I'm not trying to dog on the Reds right now. The difference is the Reds are a really big underdog. Jesus isn't an underdog right now. We have hope. We have the greatest hope of all time because we know that it's going to happen. Like, we know that God's got plans for us. We know that God is going to save us. Like, again, that's what we know. And I think with that assurance, hope becomes a lot more real. It becomes a lot more of a reality. It's not this idea. It's not this figmented, fleeting thought that, oh, this is a crazy idea to even have hope on it. Like, don't get your hopes up. We should get our hopes up because it's going to happen. And so I think that's why, in order for suffering to become redemptive, you have to enter into it with present faith, with present hope, and with present love. You have to embrace all three of those. And obviously, suffering sucks. And I don't think those should be used as ways to disguise your suffering. I think they should be used as ways to enter into your suffering with virtue.
I don't disagree with you whatsoever. I mean, you're very much correct. And we go to, I know you wanted me to bring this up, so I'm going to bring it up.
Go for it.
Hebrews 6:19. We have
excited about this one.
We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain. Oh my gosh, I had this on my paper. The quote from Paul from Romans. So I'm just going to read that right now.
Go for that real quick.
Not only so, but we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance. That's the word I was looking for. Character and hope. And hope does not put us to shame because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. And also Psalms 42, this is a good one as well. Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Savior and my God. And so I think if we were able to talk to Friedrich Nietzsche about this, Cole, I think this is where we should go with this a little bit.
Okay.
If we were to talk to Friedrich Nietzsche about this, how would we handle that? And I think what we would say is we are not trying to prolong the torments of man. I think as a Christian, we should know the torments of man more than anybody, and that is why we anchor our hope and faith in God, because we know about the torments of man. We know about the true suffering. We know about the difficulties of the spiritual battle, and that's what leads us to hope. That's what leads us to love, because, and Friedrich Nietzsche very much disagrees with this aspect of Christianity, which we can get into later if we want to, but it leads us to humility, and it leads us to submission. I'll say submission as my word. Submission to God. And if we are going to truly live in faith, hope, and love of Christ, then we have to, we've talked about it many times, we have to be humble. We have to submit to God. That is how it works. And Friedrich Nietzsche would very much disagree with that aspect. But if we were to give him an argument, we'd say, Friedrich Nietzsche, we are not prolonging this. We live in this torment, but if we have hope out of the torment because of God, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I don't really know where to go with this, to be honest with you. I think Paul's a really good example, just because, I mean, you're looking at a man who was one of the most infamous Christian persecutors in history. And then one day, he was riding a horse, donkey? I don't remember. He was riding some animal, and he was crossing a bridge, and all of a sudden, boom, right in front of him, an angel pops up, and he falls off his horse, and he's like, holy cow, what is happening? And this angel essentially converts him, and he becomes one of the most profound, well-known Christians, Catholics in history. And it's incredible to even think about that. But it's moments like that, again, that are reassurances of our hope. And one of the things that Friedrich Nietzsche says, and one of the things that he talks about, is how the problem with hope is that it's a link to the cult of self. Do you know what that means? Where am I getting at?
I'm not getting that at the moment, no.
He says that hope is actually a lot more, it's a lot more selfish. It's something that when we have hope, we're thinking about our own. Let me hold up. I want to read this real quick because I think it can explain it better.
Yeah, and
it places,
Oh, did you get it?
Yeah, I have
Okay,
it.
I was going to stall for you for a
No,
second. But
it places the individual's will above any transcendent moral order, thereby turning hope into a selfless affirmation of one's own will rather than a genuine moral good, which is interesting.
fascinating.
I feel like it's, as from the Christian standpoint, I feel like it's the exact opposite. I feel like hope has so much to do with the person you have hope in rather than yourself. And so, again, this is why, again, at the beginning of the episode, I highlighted the difference between cardinal virtue and theological virtue, because hope is not a construct made for mankind, right? Hope is a construct made for heaven. It's a heavenly construct. It is a spiritual construct. It's a construct made for God. And so for Nietzsche, yeah, I could see it from a human standpoint. Sure, yeah, it could be the cult of self. But from a spiritual standpoint, from a standpoint of God, hope makes complete and total sense. And I actually think it's so much more freeing to have hope than to not have it at all.
I'm fascinated to see what he is trying to go with, because Nietzsche, he rejected Christianity as a slave morality that glorifies weakness and submission. He emphasized strength, human will, and the creation of individual values, believing that people must take control of their lives and shape their own destiny rather than rely on divine promises. And that quote that you just gave us doesn't make any sense to me with what I just read, because
It sounds
he
like
is-
exactly what he wants.
he's all about the self.
Yeah.
And the reality of hope is not the self. It is, well, I guess you could misconstrue and you could place hope in the wrong places, but hope as a theological virtue, as you talk about, has nothing to do with the self, because we know as Christians that we all have fallen, and the only reason that we are saved is because of Christ. And we have, of course, our faith, we could believe the wrong things, and therefore our hope could be wrong. But if we truly believe in what Jesus tells us and what he did, then our hope has to be correct, and our hope has to be outside of the self.
Yeah. I feel like we've talked about hope before in a podcast. Maybe not. I don't know. Have we done a full episode? Remember we did the counter virtues? And it was like, what's the counter virtue of faith? What's the counter virtue of love? And I think I don't think we were specifically focusing on hope in that one. But we came to the conclusion, and it actually is the counter virtue. We figured it out, that despair is the counter virtue. And so the reason why I say that hope is so important theologically and when you enter suffering is because it's counter virtue. When you don't have hope, you're despairing. And so to enter into suffering with despair is not good. No bueno. It's not what you want, because it's going to make that suffering less. There's less, what's the right word? Penance that comes out of it, if that makes sense. When you have that suffering and when you enter into it with hope, you actually get a chance to be really penitential with it. Be like, I'm offering this up for something, for somebody. Every time we enter suffering, if we offer it up for God, that's redemptive suffering. And then we can also offer it up for our fellow individuals that need prayers, need thoughts. And so that's what makes suffering a good thing. Without entering into it with hope, it is inherently it's a sucky thing. It's not great. If you enter it with despair, it's going to do a lot more harm than good to you. But if you enter into it with hope, it's going to genuinely just change the way you look at life. There's one other way I was going to go about it, and I totally forgot. That stinks.
Yeah, so we completely agree about suffering, that you enter it
Yeah.
with hope. And the only thing that I'm trying to add,
Okay.
that's
I want to hear.
is just that to live the suffering, to really experience.
Yeah, of course.
And that it is okay to feel the pain of suffering, because we don't want, and you're not trying to do this at all, and I'm not saying that you are, but we don't ever want to put out the idea that because you have hope, therefore you don't feel the suffering, and therefore it just is easy breezy through it. That is not what redemptive suffering is. And if you go back to what the example of redemptive suffering is, the cross, you will realize that it is definitely not easy, and it is definitely painful. And that's the point, that redemptive suffering is very painful, but it produces extreme redemption when you have hope and when you give it to God. And that's why we say unite ourselves to Christ's sufferings, unite ourselves to his cross.
Yeah, and I'd say another thing is kind of a warning with hope still, and I think this is going to align very much with what you have to say, is like there can be too much. You can hope too much a little bit sometimes, to the point where you don't want to, and his warning's fair, you don't want to mask it, you don't want to disguise your suffering, which is a fair warning. There are people who enter into suffering with so much hope that they don't get a chance to actually live in that suffering for a little bit, and then they never face the problem. And if you never face the problem, then it's never going to be fixed. And so entering into it with just like, there's such a thing as misplaced hope, and sometimes it's okay to have misplaced hope, like your hope this weekend, while maybe yes a little misplaced, it's great. Like that made that experience so much better. I have hope, and it's misplaced hope at this point, that Inter Miami is going to win the Supporters Shield this year. It's not going to happen. It probably won't. Their odds are like 0 to none.
Cole's how he handles his hope is very different, because he would say that, like, he says it like that, and I would say like he knew all week, but when the Reds were about to play the Dodgers, like the way I talk about my hope is, you can hear the hope. With you're like, it's not gonna happen, but I still hope.
Yeah.
I'm more like, it's going to happen, and I hope.
Nazar's is confident hope. Mine is
trying to brace for
hope,
the disappointment.
Yeah, I think it's perceptive. It's what's Zendaya's quote in Spider-Man? Oh man,
If you never expect something, then you'll never be disappointed.
Yeah, and it's
I'll look it up.
It's pretty terrible advice, actually. But I guess I take that with hope sometimes. I'm very perceptive. Like, again, I don't want to put, like, I think this is how you should look at suffering. Be perceptive of how your suffering is, and don't put all your eggs in one basket.
The quote is, if you expect disappointment, then you can never really get disappointed.
Yeah. And that's kind of terrible advice.
Yeah, definitely.
But
we don't agree with that.
Yeah, but interesting. It's an interesting to talk about.
I will say, though,
I think Nietzsche would agree with that.
he probably would.
Yeah.
I wish he was still alive, that we could talk to this guy.
It'd be an interesting
But
conversation.
Another thing that I want to add to this, as I attempt to remember at the moment. Oh, gosh. Okay, I remembered. Thank goodness. So, in reality, we can have as much hope as we want in our lives. We can have as much faith as we want in our lives. But the reality is that our hope, our faith, we may not get to see the results of it while we're on earth. We may not see the results of it until we die. And I'm trying to think of an exact example of someone who prayed and who suffered throughout their life and yet never actually saw it come to fruition. However, we know they had faith and hope, which means when they died, they probably went to heaven. But the thing is, we can have as much hope as we want. I have as much hope in the world that one day I'm going to see a Reds World Series. There is such a reality that might not happen. You might be praying for a miracle that, say, you have you get cancer. Think about how many people get cancer in the world, how many people die from cancer. I believe it's the second leading cause of death. The only reason I know that is because of psychology of aging. We unfortunately looked at the causes of death. But if you think about all the people who have cancer, you think about all the people that probably pray for the person that has cancer. They pray for their own cancer. There's so many people that you'll see that have incredible hope in the midst of their suffering through cancer. And do those people always survive?
No.
They do not. They do not. So it's this point of hope that I'm trying to make is we can have as much of it as possible, and it still might not work while we're on Earth. I don't even know if that's the right word. I don't even know if that's the right word.
I think that is. I think that. Well, yeah. I don't know.
Because our hope still does work.
It's working.
It does work.
It's working, like I said, and even in the definition of hope for the future, it is a progressiveness of our heart, and it's when you don't see it physically. It's a progressiveness of your soul. It's moving your soul forward, getting your soul closer. I actually want to define reality really quickly. It's the state or quality of having existence or substance. Again, Nietzsche's idea, no God. That means there's no heaven, right? So hope is obsolete. It means nothing to him. It is so like if I didn't believe in a God, if I was an atheist, I'd probably agree with them 100% on this. I'd be like, yeah, hope is stupid. There's no point in it. But because as Christians, we believe there's another reality, and that's heaven. And our soul and our heart, hope is incredible, because hope is kind of what helps us, in a sense. It gives us that longing, that I know this mosquito's been killing me all episode. This drive for heaven, and at the end of the day, that's why it's so important.
Yeah, and the biggest difference of how it changes someone's life, I think, from Nietzsche's point of view to our point of view, and it's what he's trying to wrestle with. As he says, he talks about how, let's see, where is it at here? People must take control of their lives and shape their own destiny, or rather than relying on divine promises. He's trying to help the world, he thinks, to find purpose without God. What would like he says, God is dead. Like the belief that society has abandoned belief in God. And he's saying, okay, if we've abandoned belief in God, what are we going to do? How are we going to find purpose? What are we going to do with our lives? Because God gave us a command from Genesis to cultivate the land, to make sure that we rule over the earth and it is abundant. We have this abundance of the earth, and to let it sprout forth, and to have a good earth. And so if we don't have God, if we don't have these commands, if we don't have his promises, what is the reason for life? What is our purpose? Why should we do anything good? Why should we not just do whatever the heck we wanted? That's what he's really wrestling with that. And how much do we see, how do we see that has affected the world in so much, Cole?
I can't really think of anything at the moment.
I'm thinking about,
yeah.
I'm just thinking about, like, I see this book around Bama Catholic. It talks about, I think it's around Bama Catholic, like talking about absolute relativism.
Yeah.
And the belief that
We still need to have my dad on for an episode to talk about that.
We do.
That's what he wants to talk
we're
about.
gonna just go into it a little bit then, so we
Yeah.
don't ruin that episode.
Yeah.
But just the relativism of, like, it's just relative if it's towards me. Like, whatever you believe is you believe. However you see things is how you see things. I see it a different way. That's okay. We both can do it our own way. We both can want whatever we want.
Relativism is a nutshell.
Yeah. And it's basically niche, like 1800s is when we saw the beginnings of these types of ideas. In the 1900s is when it, like, was super transformative, and now we're kind of seeing the results of all of it, as what I would say. The real results of this transformation of the mind, of society, into relativism, into these different ideas of how people just make up whatever they want for their own selves. And that's exactly what Nietzsche wanted. However, it's fascinating to think what he would think of the world and what's going on in the world now that has happened.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I don't know.
Like, it's interesting. So he wanted people to take control of their lives. I would say that people have taken the control of their lives, and it hasn't gone very well for the world. And is that how he saw it would happen? Because we think about this change in the 1900s of so many governments, to whether you have communism, socialism, fascism. We still see, like, those types of governments now. People that believed in communism and socialism believed that it would lead to a utopian society. That was the goal of it, if I'm not mistaken. And yes, it failed. They still thought it was going to work. Did Nietzsche think this idea for the world was going to work? And what did he see it as is something interesting to think about.
I think he'd probably be rejoicing in today's society, because, I mean, everything's become so individualistic. It's, oh, this makes me happy, so I'm going to do this. You know, morally, it's most, like, some of these things are not good things. But, like, that's all that it's become. I think we've lost the element of sacrifice. We've lost the element of love and a sense of, like, moral love. And there's a lot of community. There's a lot of things, and, you know, each generation has their issues. Ours are a little more apparent. It's like, for our issue is, what about me? Like, what about me? And that goes with just problems we see day to day in America and the world, problems we see in Christianity. Faith has become very individualistic. It's my experience with God is what's important, and that's it. And it's dangerous stuff. It is. A little funny thing. I was going to say this little tidbit about faith. Zach actually just texted me, which I think is funny, because we're talking about hope. And, you know, sometimes hope can still be rewarded on earth. We're not saying that that's not possible. Zach was on the wait list on Sunday hoping for a ticket to the game, and he just texted me that he got one this morning.
Let's
Sent me
go.
a picture of it. So, like, there is such a thing as, like, being hopeful can still be good. I remember Zach last weekend, and I, again, it has to do with tickets, bought a ticket and didn't realize his was in the upper bowl and mine was in the lower bowl. And we were like, shoot, like, what do we do? It's like an hour and a half before kickoff. And I like, both of us were hopeful. I was like, don't worry, we're going to find somebody. It'll be okay. Zach he felt pretty bad. And at the end of the day, we found somebody that was willing to trade with us just for an upper. And I was like, wow, that's crazy. And like we immediately, like, it was like, thank you God for giving us this opportunity. And that hope it was rewarded in that sense. So have hope and don't be discouraged if it isn't rewarded to you on earth. It can be, but don't be disappointed if it isn't, because your eternal reward is so much greater than that.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm thinking about, as you said, the sort of generational differences, and I think about like the baby boomers and sort of the era that our parents grew up in, and that the individual really wasn't a thing as much. It was way more of like, hey, if someone tells you to do this, you need to do this.
yeah.
Listen to your parents. Get up, go to work. Doesn't matter if you're sick or anything like that. So we've got one side of it where I would say that they weren't quite individualistic enough. They weren't, I would say they aren't as good about being vulnerable, about, talking about their feelings, really knowing what's going on inside. And then we have our side,
Yeah.
which is too much individualistic.
overabundance.
And so it goes into the quote that I love going back to, moderation in everything.
Yep.
And that is very true. You can be too individual. You can be not individualistic enough. There is a healthy balance for everything. And as we talk about with this quote, there's a balance for hope.
Yeah.
There's a balance for despair. There's a balance for suffering. It's all about finding the balance.
I think our parents' thing is they kind of were not at the start. They kind of entered a little bit into the beginning of corporate America. So I think a lot of their generation's issues was a lot of greed. And then you started seeing companies that had, bad morality and would manipulate the system. And then you had things like the Great Depression start to happen, and all these huge failures in America in particular, just because that's the history we're well versed in. But I think that was like their first issue is greed. Maybe their generation's first thing they hit was greed. And yeah, they weren't very vulnerable. I feel like
Could you not say that our generation's is greed? What would you say?
I'd say our generation's biggest problem right now is pride.
But doesn't greed come from pride?
Yes, but I would say in particular, greed comes from pride, but there is still you can still just be prideful.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I think as a whole, our generation suffers with pride, which is, again, especially like we're talking about how much individualism means right now in America, and pride is all about self-centeredness. And if the entirety of our society is structured of what about me, what if I feel this way, what about this, what does that mean for me, all of these other things, it's just pride in a nutshell. And I would say, yes, all those other deadly sins come from pride. So yes, there's an essence of pride and greed, I would say, but the pride became more apparent in our generation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And yeah, we are going to transition, ladies and gentlemen, to our next section of the podcast. We hope you enjoyed our long quote section. We're going to jump into the practical prayer practice.
Ladies and gentlemen, the practical prayer practice of the week.
Alrighty. And we are back for another segment. Nazaria, do you want to intro it?
Yeah, so we actually have two options for the practical prayer practice.
Oh,
and
options.
so, ladies and gentlemen, you can do either one. You can do one, you can do both, whatever it is. We just hope that one of the two touches your heart today. So, option A for our practical prayer practice of the week is to reflect on areas where you are tempted to despair or rely on false hopes. Bring these before God in silent prayer, asking Him to anchor your hope in Him rather than in outcomes. Cole, anything to say on that?
Nope. I think that's kind of what we just talked about.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah,
option
it's perfect,
A.
Yeah.
And option B is to have a Lectio Divina on Hebrews 6:19, which a Lectio Divina is you read the verse slowly, meditate on the image of hope as an anchor, and journal how God might be calling you to a deeper trust. So a little bit of a deeper one. And Hebrews 6:19 is we have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain. So that is option B for our practical prayer practice of the week.
And I actually don't think these have to be options. I think you can very well do both. I
Yeah.
think once you identify those first things, I actually think that'll make your Lectio Divina a lot more profound, a lot deeper, and give you a chance to meditate a little more. So maybe do both. My advice would probably be to do both. If you enter into the first one and really ponder those things, and then read the scripture verse, I think it's going to be a lot more fruitful doing that. Personal opinion.
Yeah.
But you
So-
can choose either one. Up to you guys.
So yeah, those are our practical prayer practices for the week. Hope, people. Hope. We're going to move on to our shepherd of the week.
Ladies and gentlemen, the shepherd of the week.
It's kind of funny because our shepherd's really interesting because it's all about entering into suffering with hope, which is funny because it goes back to literally my first point in this entire episode. But
It makes sense, Cole.
Yeah, I'll let
It
you go
makes
for it.
sense. So, our shepherd of the week is Job. I don't know if we've ever had Job as a shepherd of the week, Cole.
No, but we certainly have talked about him. I mean, it's my favorite book in the Bible. Because you want to talk about a man who's been beat down and through Bible stories. I mean, Job just suffered and suffered and suffered and suffered, and throughout the entire time held his faith and held hope that God has a plan for him, and in the end he did. And so it's kind of cool. That whole story is just fascinating because it's like what's interesting to me is how far can the human mind go? You know, like how much can you actually be tested and still withstand? And I think Job kind of he defied the limits, showing that there really wasn't a limit. Like the human mind can withstand. It's all about the hope that helps you get through it, though.
And so, two
Wow, that was
two
funny.
Bible verses from the book of Job, from chapter 13, verse 15. Though he slay me, yet I will hope in him. And from chapter 19, verses 25 through 27, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. After my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. I myself will see him with my own eyes, I and not another. How my heart yearns within me. So yeah, this man
It's pretty legit.
entered into his suffering,
Yeah, he
100%. So we talked about that, entering into the suffering. It's real. This man lost his family. He lost his children. He lost his
Everybody.
wealth. He lost his health. He lost his job. He entered into it. He felt it. Man, did he feel that pain, I'm sure, more than anyone. And still, he had hope. And he gave his despair to God. He allowed God to fill him with hope. And just a wonderful example of what we're trying to get at with this episode.
For those of you who want a modern equivalent of Job in today's society, just think of Thor from Marvel. I mean,
It's
legitimately lost everything. I mean, it's funny because every time he gets close with somebody, Marvel kills the person he gets close with off. But you know, as much as I despise the movie Thor: Love and Thunder, at the end of the day, he kind of gets his happy ending with his daughter. And so throughout the entire time, you could see him fall down, but in the end, he got back up, and that hope that something better was planned for him was there. So, a modern equivalent of Job is Thor. So there you go.
Yeah. So if you ever want to enter into the book of Job as well, to pray through suffering and to remain in hope, you can have a great example from the book of Job. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this has been a very fascinating episode. Cole, do you have any final thoughts?
Not really. I think I've got everything I need to get out.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we went about 43 minutes on our main portion of this episode.
That was our quote.
Yeah.
43 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
Holy cow, what are we at right now?
We're at 48.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
so
Kudos to us. We can yap.
yeah, it was very, very fruitful conversation. I hope that y'all enjoyed. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, leave a review on podcast. You can get a wristband from us. You can buy a t-shirt on our links. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, wherever you can find the Lost Sheep Podcast. DM us if you ever have any questions, comments, concerns, and we will hopefully one day have a mailbag episode once we get enough questions. But ladies and gentlemen, hope in reality is not the worst of all evils. It is a wonderful theological virtue that we must enter into our suffering as well with hope and allow God to redeem it. Thank you all for tuning in. God bless.